This is David Bruce Leonard from the Earth Medicine Institute.
And Dr. Janae DeVica.
Here in Makawao on Maui, and we are going to make, what are we making?
We're making some amazing fermented cabbage with Gotu Kola.
Gotu Kola, we're making a Gotu Kola ferment.
Oh.
Gotu Kola is a remarkable plant. This is, we wildcrafted this from Makani Olu Ranch, and I'm really grateful to Ron Rikers and Avery Chumley for donating this.
Mahalo.
Mahalo. This is an awesome herb. It is a blood thinner. It helps keep the blood vessels flexible. It is used, it's a good anti-inflammatory. It's great for injuries. It's kind of an all-around, it's kind of a Swiss Army herb. You don't want to use Gotu Kola in pregnancy or with pharmaceutical blood thinners. When gathering wild plants, one of the things we do is I use specific protocols that I was taught by my teachers. I would recommend using a protocol when you're gathering herbs. The Gotu Kola was wildcrafted, so it was done with protocol. However, you can choose whatever protocol you want, but I recommend doing that as a way to open your nervous system, what I call neurohacking, and also a way to connect to the plants and connect directly to the land.
So we have this amazing Gotu Kola, and we were wondering what in the world we were going to do with it. And David's made a video on how to make Gotu Kola pesto, so make sure you check that out. Delicious. But we were wondering what else to do. And Gotu Kola is, the leaves are very, they're sort of heavy-duty leaves. So think of like parsley, like the curly parsley. It's kind of, they're kind of stiff like that.
It's the same family as parsley too. It's Apiaceae.
Yeah. And they taste like sort of like carrot tops. And so we're trying to think of like what would work with like a stiff leaf that's a little too stiff for a salad, tastes like carrot tops, and we thought we could put it into a cabbage ferment, a sauerkraut. And what happens when you ferment vegetables is it actually enhances their nutrient value, it enhances their medicinal properties, it of course creates a probiotic food that can help to build up your microbiome and heal your microbiome. And when we're doing flavor combination, when we have something like Gotu Kola, which is sort of a bland flavor, we want to mix it with something that's a little more flavorful, so that you have something enjoyable to eat that's like, you know, pleasant to the palate. So when you're fermenting greens, you don't want to ferment greens that are soft, and this is stiff enough that it will work. And anytime you can ferment any food, it's going to do amazing, amazing things for your body. So we've rinsed this with just plain water, but the microbes from the earth are still on the Gotu Kola. So as we ferment this, the microbes from the earth are going to be growing in this kraut, but we're also going to inoculate the kraut with some probiotics. These are just little probiotic pills that you can get from the health food store. And the reason we do this is because when you're making kraut, it works by what's called competitive inhibition. That means there's a certain amount of space for the bacteria to grow, and whichever guys get in there soonest and grow the fastest, those are the guys that win. So you want the good microbes to grow faster and bigger than the bad microbes. So when you inoculate with good microbes, that means the bad microbes can't take over as quickly. And also we're going to put some salt in there, some natural Himalayan sea salt.
Now when we're gathering Gotu Kola, or actually gathering any wild plant, here in Hawaii we have something called rat lungworm disease, which is a really devastating disease. It's eosinophilic meningitis, and it's quite dangerous and is caused by a nematode. So whenever we're gathering wild plants, we want to make sure that we wash them really well before we eat them or cook them. But this is not going to be cooked, it's going to be fermented, so to be safe, we were very careful to wash this Gotu Kola, and the vegetables were washed also.
All right, when you're making sauerkraut, it's so easy. All you need is some cabbage. You can use regular green cabbage, red cabbage like I've got here. You can use bok choy or napa cabbage, whatever you've got on hand. And then you can also add in any kinds of herbs or greens that you have. Make sure that the greens are nice and stiff. You don't want to use soft greens like lettuce. Those will just get kind of mushy.
Or things that are slimy that'll tend to become mucilaginous because they'll make the quality of your kraut unpalatable.
Yes. All right, so you can slice up the cabbage any way you like. You can use a food processor, you can use a salad master slicer, or you can just do it the old-fashioned way with a knife. Here, why don't we both cut together? There you go.
Okay.
Now, when you're cutting the cabbage, you want to make sure that it's nice and thin because you want the surface area of the cabbage to be as prominent as possible. The bacteria go in and they actually break down the cell walls of the cabbage, and so the more surface area you can include, the better it is.
Yours are definitely thinner than mine.
Make sure when you're making kraut as well, because we're growing bacteria in this kraut, you want to make sure you're growing the right kind of bacteria. So make sure your cutting boards, your knives, and your hands and your bowls, everything you're using is completely clean. It's great if you wash it with hot soapy water, but also be aware that soap kills bacteria.
All bacteria.
So if you leave any soap residue on your bowls or your knives or your cutting boards, that's going to kill it as well. So make sure that it's very sanitary and clean, and make sure that it's soap-free. All right, after the cabbage is chopped, what we're going to do is chop the Gotu Kola. If you'll notice, it's got really long stems on it that could be super stringy. So we're just going to chop it so it's approximately the same size as the cabbage. All right, once the Gotu Kola is chopped, we're just going to mix it up to make sure that it's well distributed with the cabbage. And then we're going to add the salt. So the salt is used to inhibit the bad bacteria from growing. It also helps to break down the cell walls of the cabbage and the Gotu Kola to release the moisture, and breaking down the cell walls helps to get the bacteria production started, and it's also for flavor. So the amount of salt you use, I like to start with about a tablespoon of salt per head of cabbage, just as a general rule. But for people who want less salt, you can use the probiotics from the store. If you use less salt, use more probiotics from the store to inoculate it, because again, we're using that competitive inhibition, and we want to stop the bad bacteria from growing and encourage the good bacteria to grow. So more salt will do that, or more friendly bacteria will do that. So you can kind of adjust your salt level and how much friendly bacteria you put in there, just depending on that general rule. So start out with a tablespoon per head of cabbage and a capsule of probiotics, and adjust it from there. And what we're doing now is we're just massaging the cabbage and the leaves so that helps to further break down the cell walls. And some people pound the cabbage. You can pound it if you like, but I find the massaging is just a little bit quicker and easier and maybe less messy. David might disagree. You like to pound your cabbage, right?
I do pound my cabbage, but I normally use purple cabbage, which is a little bit more dense than this cabbage. So. Crucifers in general are very powerful healing herbs, vegetables. They have chemicals in them that actually actively prevent cancer. So things like cabbage and bok choy and broccoli and cauliflower all have sulforaphanes in them, chemicals that are very powerful anti-carcinogens.
And they're very anti-inflammatory as well. So if you're dealing with any sort of inflammatory conditions, whether it be heart disease or cancer or diabetes, like basically all chronic illnesses have an inflammatory component. your crucifers are going to help with that inflammation reduction. Now we're just going to massage until the water, see how the water comes out of that? You know, you've massaged enough when that happens, and then we're just going to sprinkle the capsule of probiotics over the top.
Okay, so I'm going to open the probiotic capsule with the acidophilus, and I'm going to sprinkle the little critters into this mix.
Now when you're choosing what kind of probiotic to put in there, generally you can just go to your health food store and pick something from the refrigerated section. Just as a guideline, I find that soil-based organisms from the store don't usually work very well for kraut, so I get the kind that are the white powder in the capsules. And I also get something that has a broad spectrum of bacteria in it. That means it has a lot of different kinds of bacteria, and something that is a high potency, which means I generally don't get capsules that have less than 10 billion microorganisms per capsule. And if you can get more than that, that's great. So here we go. This is nice and broken down. Now we're going to stuff this into the jar. And when you're growing these bacteria as kraut, the growth process is an anaerobic growth, which means these bacteria grow without oxygen. So we need to keep all of the plant matter, all of the food, below the water line so that all of the oxygen stays out of it. Generally, if the kraut pops up above the water line, it can get moldy, it can start to spoil, and it will definitely decrease the flavor profile of your kraut. So as you're putting it in there, you just pour the water on top, and then you can go like this and just push it down. As you smash it down, you can see that the water line is kind of at the same level as the cabbage, but not above. And what you want to do is make sure that the water is a couple inches above the cabbage. So what we do is we just take some filtered water and we mix a brine, which is a tablespoon of water per quart of filtered water. And then we take that brine and we pour it over the cabbage until it's just a couple inches above the cabbage, and that will keep the environment anaerobic. We also want to clean everything off, so usually I take a paper towel, or you can use water, like purified water, to wash it all down. And you just clean off all the plant materials so that there's nothing above the water line. And here's a little trick. So what happens when the bacteria are growing, the bacteria, one of the byproducts of the bacteria is carbon dioxide. So you'll notice there's going to be little bubbles growing in here, and the bubbles will push the plant matter up so it's floating above the water line, and you want to be able to keep all that down below the water line. So you want to make sure that the jar is not overfilled. If it is, you'll notice that the fluid is pouring over the sides. So keep at least a couple inches of airspace on top, and then a couple inches of water barrier between the plants and the top. And here's a little trick that really helps. If you take the end of the cabbage, or just if you're using a regular cabbage like this, remove some whole leaves off of there, and you can create a little tamper kind of thing.
Tamper.
Yeah, a little tamper thing to hold it down. So usually what I do is pull off a leaf. When I learned how to do this, it was genius, because before that I was always fighting with my kraut, how do I keep it down? So you just go like that, you stuff the leaf in there and you kind of spread it out over the top, and you use it as a lid to keep everything down. Push it down so the water goes over the top of it, and then you can use this little butt end of the cabbage to kind of weigh it down. And then just keep an eye on it, and as the carbon dioxide pushes, and then fill up the water so it covers everything up, and as the carbon dioxide pushes everything up, just take a plastic spoon or something and you can just shove it down. And then all you do is put a lid on it, not very tight because all the carbon dioxide production will create a lot of pressure in there. So you want to put a lid on so that it prevents things from falling in, but you also don't want to screw it down really tight because the pressure will build and the bottle will burst. So just leave the lid on really loose. And then you put it in a dark, cool, dark spot for 3 to 14 days, depending on how long you want it to ferment. Generally, I watch the little bubbles, and as soon as the bubbles stop, that means the bacteria have finished fermenting whatever is in there that they want to eat. And again, depending on the temperature, depending on what you're using, depending on how you've inoculated it, it can take anywhere between 3 and 14 days.
And this is what we call eat the aliens. This is using, wild plants have incredible nutrition, and they say that the average hunter-gatherer ate something like 180 plants in any given month, and we eat like 6. So if we're lucky. So our body, we've evolved with phytoreceptors, receptors in our body that are activated by plant chemicals. So when we eat wild foods and we take the wild foods inside, we get the benefit of all the stimulation of those phytoreceptors in our bodies. Gotu Kola is a very interesting plant. It's used all over the world for memory, and it's been used in China for leprosy and Hansen's disease, all kinds of things. One of the interesting things about it, though, is that in India, it was one of the 2 plants that was called Brahmi. And they were the plants used to increase spiritual power, but also to memorize those long Vedic chants that the Hindus would memorize. So this is really quite a powerful brain food, as well as a super antioxidant for the body. The Chinese have a saying about Gotu Kola: if you eat 1 leaf a day, you'll live an extra 25 years. 2 leaves a day, an extra 50 years, and 3 leaves a day, you'll live forever. This is a very powerful medicine, and again, not in pregnancy and not in pharmaceutical blood thinners. This is David Bruce Leonard from the Earth Medicine Institute, here with Dr. Janae Devika, wishing you happy foraging.